Welcome to J&M Bedtime Stories. Tonight, we will be diving into more unsettling true crime cases. But before you drift off to sleep, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Check out one of our playlists to fill those long nights with restful sleep. Thanks for watching. Let's get started. A white van is parked quietly near a remote campsite in Wyoming. Inside it, a young woman's life is about to end. Just hours earlier, she had been smiling for Instagram, posting in front of a butterfly mural. Her caption spoke about adventure, freedom, and chasing dreams. But behind the curated photos and filtered sunsets, something was unraveling. 2 days later, her fiancé would be hitchhiking alone. 3 days later, strange text messages would be sent from her phone. Within weeks, the entire world would be asking one question: where is Gabby? This is the story of van life, viral fame, warning signs caught on police body cam, and a tragedy that millions watched unfold in real time. Gabrielle Petito, known to everyone as Gabby, was born on March 19, 1999, in Blue Point, New York. She was artistic, creative, drawn to yoga, nature, and documenting her life online. Friends described her as kind, energetic, and determined to build something meaningful. She met Brian Christopher Laundrie in high school. The two reconnected in 2019 and began dating seriously in March of that year. Before long, Gabby moved to Northport, Florida, to live with Brian and his parents. They worked together at a Publix grocery store. She as a pharmacy technician, he in the grocery department. When the pandemic hit, they quit their jobs. And that's when the dream began to take shape. Van life, minimalism, freedom, a cross-country journey captured on YouTube and Instagram. In December 2020, Gabby bought a white 2012 Ford Transit Connect van and had it converted into a tiny camper. She worked 50 hours a week at Taco Bell and other jobs to save money for the trip. On July 2nd, 2021, they left New York for what was supposed to be a 4-month journey across America. Monument Rocks, Great Sand Dunes, Zion, Bryce Canyon, and Canyonlands. Their social media painted a picture of bliss, but off camera, things were not as perfect as they seemed. August 12, 2021, Moab, Utah. A 911 caller reports seeing a man slap a woman outside the Moonflower Community Cooperative. Police locate the van near Arches National Park and pull it over. Body camera footage shows Gabby crying uncontrollably in the passenger seat. She tells officers she has OCD, that she's stressed, that she's trying to build her blog, and Brian doesn't believe in her. She apologizes repeatedly. Officers note marks on her face and arm. When pressed, she says Brian grabbed her face and told her to shut up. Brian tells police she was the aggressor, that he was just trying to calm her down. Neither wants to press charges. Police categorize it as a mental health crisis, not domestic violence. They separate the couple for the night. Brian goes to a motel. Gabby stays in the van. The next morning, they reunite and continue the trip. In hindsight, many would point to this moment as a flashing red warning sign. On August 17th, Brian flies from Salt Lake City to Florida, leaving Gabby alone in Utah. He returns days later. On August 25th, Gabby speaks to her mother for the last time. She says they're heading towards Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks. That same day, her final Instagram post appears. August 27th, witnesses later report seeing the couple arguing at a restaurant in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Brian allegedly acts aggressive towards staff. Gabby returns inside crying and apologizing for his behavior. CCTV captures them at a Whole Foods later that afternoon. At 2:56 p.m., their van heads north towards Bridger Teton National Forest. This is the last confirmed footage of Gabby alive. That evening, dashcam footage from other travelers captures a white van parked near Spread Creek dispersed camping area. Days later, a text message from Gabby's phone reads, "No service in Yosemite." Her mother doesn't believe it was written by her. On September 1st, Brian Laundrie drives the van alone back to his parents' home in Florida. Gabby is not with him, and he refuses to explain why. On September 11th, Gabby's mother files a missing persons report. 4 days later, Brian is named a person of interest. He does not speak. His parents hire an attorney and remain silent. Then on September 17th, Brian himself is reported missing. Now there are two mysteries. On September 19th, human remains are found in Wyoming's Bridger Teton National Forest. The autopsy confirms what many feared. Gabby Petito was killed by blunt force injuries to the head and neck and manual strangulation. Her death is ruled a homicide. The search intensifies for Brian. Weeks pass. Then, on October 20th, skeletal remains are discovered in Florida. Dental records confirmed they belonged to Brian Laundrie. He died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Near his remains is a notebook. Inside, he admits to killing Gabby. In January 2022, the FBI announced the case is officially closed. The case didn't just dominate headlines, it dominated social media. TikTok users analyzed dashcam footage. Internet sleuths mapped timelines. Body cam videos were dissected frame by frame. Millions watched in real time as a missing persons case unfolded online. The contrast was haunting. Filtered Instagram posts of love and adventure, and the reality of control, conflict, and escalating violence. Gabby's story sparked national conversations about domestic abuse, coercive control, and how warning signs can be misunderstood or minimized. It also raised difficult questions. Could the Moab incident have been handled differently? Were there missed opportunities to intervene? And how many other victims never received this level of attention? Gabby Petito was 22 years old. She loved art, yoga, travel, and documenting beauty in the world. Her life became a global headline. But before she was a case, she was a daughter, a sister, a friend. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, resources are available. You are not alone. Philadelphia, January 1987. A woman runs barefoot through the freezing night. She pounds on a stranger's door. When police arrive, she tells them a story so horrifying it sounds impossible. She says she has been held captive in a basement, that other women are still down there. that the man who imprisoned them believes he's chosen by God. Within hours, officers enter a row house on North Marshall Street. Inside, they discover one of the most disturbing crime scenes in Philadelphia history. Tonight, we're stepping into the case of Gary Heidnik, a man who built a nightmare beneath his own home. Gary Heidnik was born in 1943 in Cleveland, Ohio. His childhood was marked by instability. He reportedly struggled with mental health issues from an early age. After joining the Army, he was discharged due to psychiatric concerns. Over time, Heidnik developed delusional religious beliefs. In the 1970s, he founded what he called the United Church of the Ministries of God. He managed to attract followers. He even accumulated significant savings through investments. Outwardly, he appeared eccentric but functional. He owned property, he collected disability payments, he presented himself as deeply religious. But beneath that facade, control and obsession were growing. Before the murders, Heidnik had a history of disturbing behavior. In 1978, he was convicted of kidnapping and assault after luring a woman into his basement. He served time in prison, but after his release, he returned to the same house, the same basement, the same environment. Neighbors described him as strange, but mostly quiet. Few could imagine what would soon unfold beneath their feet. In late 1986, Heidnik began abducting women in Philadelphia. Most were vulnerable. Some struggled with mental illness. Some were experiencing homelessness. He lured them with the promise of shelter or assistance. Instead, he imprisoned them in his basement. He restrained them, controlled their food, manipulated them psychologically. He believed he was creating something twisted, a family under his authority. Over several months, he held multiple women captive. 2 of them did not survive. The suffering inside that house remained hidden from the outside world until one woman found an opportunity. On January 2nd, 1987, one captive, Josefina Rivera, convinced Heidnik to trust her. She promised loyalty, obedience, and when he briefly allowed her outside, she ran. Her escape led police directly to the house. When officers entered, they uncovered the basement prison. The conditions were shocking. Women were rescued alive. Evidence confirmed the deaths of 2 victims, Sandra Lindsay and Deborah Dudley. Heidnik was arrested immediately. The city reeled. The story dominated headlines. How had this happened in a row house on an ordinary street? Gary Heidnik's trial began in 1988. His defense centered on mental illness. He claimed insanity. Prosecutors argued that despite his delusions, he understood the criminal nature of his actions. The jury agreed with the prosecution. He was convicted of multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and assault. He was sentenced to death. In 1999, Gary Heidnik was executed by lethal injection, becoming the last person executed in Pennsylvania. Heidnik's case is often studied in criminology and forensic psychology. His crimes combined delusional religious ideology, extreme need for control, and calculated manipulation. Unlike impulsive killers, Heidnik created a prolonged environment of captivity. He used psychological domination as much as physical restraint. Experts continued debating the role of severe mental illness in his crimes, but the suffering inflicted was real and intentional. The Heidnik case left a permanent mark on Philadelphia. It raised questions about how warning signs could be missed, the challenges of balancing mental health treatment and public safety, and the vulnerability of marginalized individuals. The survivors displayed extraordinary resilience. Their courage in testifying ensured accountability, and their escape prevented further harm. The row house on North Marshall Street still stands. The basement has long since been cleared, but the memory remains. Gary Heidnik believed he could control life and death beneath his own home, but one act of bravery shattered that illusion. In a quiet neighborhood in Poughkeepsie, New York, there was a house people tried not to look at. The smell came first. Neighbors described it as unbearable, rotten, sickly sweet, impossible to ignore. They complained, they called the city, but they were told it was probably just garbage. Inside that house lived a man described as quiet, shy, and polite. He lived with his elderly parents. He rarely made eye contact and kept to himself. And inside his home, hidden beneath piles of trash, inside sealed containers, were the bodies of 8 women. For nearly 2 years, they were there. This is the disturbing story of Kendall Francois, the man who turned his family home into a chamber of horror. Kendall Francois was born in 1971 in Poughkeepsie, New York. To most people, he seemed unremarkable. He was large, over 6 feet tall, and weighing nearly 400 pounds. He struggled socially. He was often described as awkward and withdrawn. He graduated from high school and briefly attended college. On the surface, there were no obvious warning signs of the violence to come. But behind the scenes, Francois was battling deep psychological issues. He later confessed to having violent fantasies. He felt anger towards women. He struggled with rejection. And sometime in 1996, those fantasies turned into action. In 1996, women began disappearing from the streets of Poughkeepsie. Most of them were vulnerable. Some struggled with addiction. Some were involved in adult work. Some were simply trying to survive. Because of their circumstances, their disappearances didn't immediately trigger massive investigations. That delay would prove deadly. Francois would approach women on the street and offer money. He would invite them back to his home. His parents, who were elderly and in poor health, lived upstairs. The basement and parts of the house were cluttered with trash, old containers, and hoarded items. Inside that chaos, Francois strangled his victims. There was no elaborate ritual, no dramatic staging, just quiet violence. Afterward, he hid their bodies in sealed bins under blankets beneath garbage. The smell began almost immediately. Neighbors complained repeatedly. The odor was overwhelming. Authorities visited more than once. Francois blamed it on sanitation issues. He claimed it was plumbing. He claimed it was garbage. And because of the clutter and filth in the home, the explanation seemed believable. But what investigators didn't realize was that the house had become a storage space for death. 8 women were murdered between 1996 and 1998. Their bodies remained inside the home, some for months, some for nearly 2 years. Francois continued living there, eating dinner upstairs, watching television, sleeping at night, all while decomposition filled the air. It's difficult to imagine how someone could coexist with such horror, but for Francois, it became routine. In 1998, one disappearance finally triggered serious attention. A woman named Cynthia Coons vanished. Her family refused to stay silent. Police began canvassing more aggressively. Witnesses reported seeing her get into a large man's car. Francois had been stopped previously by police during the investigation, but there wasn't enough evidence to hold him. Then, in September 1998, authorities returned to his home with a search warrant. What they found shocked even seasoned investigators. Inside the house were large plastic containers, sealed, heavy. When opened, they revealed human remains. The smell that neighbors had complained about for years finally had an answer. Francois was arrested immediately. After his arrest, Kendall Francois confessed. He admitted to killing 8 women. He described luring them into his home, strangling them, and gave chillingly matter-of-fact statements. There was no dramatic rage in his confession, no elaborate ideology. His motives appeared rooted in anger, control, and resentment. He targeted women he believed would not be missed. Women he thought society had already forgotten. But they were not forgotten. Their names mattered. Their lives mattered. In 2000, Francois pled guilty to 8 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The house was eventually demolished. Neighbors described a sense of relief, but also lingering trauma. For years, they had smelled death without knowing its source. Families of the victims faced unimaginable grief. Many had struggled to convince authorities to take the disappearances seriously. The case raised difficult questions. Why were the early complaints dismissed? Why weren't the disappearances prioritized sooner? How many lives could have been saved? Kendall Francois did not fit the stereotype of a serial killer mastermind. He was not charming. He was not highly organized. He was not living a double life of glamour and deceit. Instead, he was isolated, disorganized, living in squalor, and yet he was able to operate for nearly 2 years, not because he was brilliant, but because his victims were marginalized. It's a sobering reminder of how vulnerability can be exploited. Kendall Francois died in prison in 2014. His story is one of horror, but also of neglect. A reminder that every missing person deserves urgency. Every life deserves attention. And sometimes the most terrifying evil hides in ordinary neighborhoods. Picture this. It's April 22nd, 2016. The sun is rising over the hills of southern Ohio. Birds are beginning to chirp. The world feels ordinary. But inside 4 separate mobile homes scattered along Union Hill Road in Pike County, 8 people are lying dead. Most were shot in the head. Some were found in their beds. One was discovered with her 4-day-old baby still beside her. No signs of forced entry, no robbery, no struggle that neighbors could hear. Just execution-style killings carried out in total silence. For more than 2 years, the case would twist and turn, revealing a secret custody battle, a family feud that escalated beyond reason, and a chilling plan that prosecutors would later call a premeditated annihilation. This is the story of the Pike County Massacre, the murders of the Roden family, and what happened next would shock the entire community. Pike County, Ohio, a quiet, rural area about 80 miles south of Columbus. Rolling hills, scattered farms, generations of families who've known each other for decades. This isn't the place where mass murder happens. The Roden family lived modestly, several of them sharing land along Union Hill Road near Piketon. They were close-knit, often living just steps away from one another. They hunted together, worked together, raised children together, and that closeness would make what happened next even more devastating. On that morning in April 2016, 8 members of the Roden family were found murdered. Several were found in their beds. Most were shot in the head. Hannah Mae Roden had given birth just 4 days earlier. Her newborn daughter was found alive next to her mother's body. 2 other young children in the homes were also unharmed. That detail would become one of the most chilling aspects of the crime. Whoever did this was targeting specific adults. This wasn't random. This wasn't robbery. This was personal. Investigators quickly realized something terrifying. These murders happened across 4 different homes, all within a short walking distance, all within the same time window, and there were no signs of forced entry. Authorities later determined that multiple firearms were used, including a .22 caliber weapon and other guns. Doors were left unlocked. Some victims shot while sleeping. One of the homes had a marijuana grow operation, but officials quickly ruled out a cartel-style hit. Nothing was stolen. Sheriff Charles Reeder would later describe the crime as sophisticated. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. This was planned. Whoever did this knew the layout of the properties, knew the routines, knew when people would be asleep, and most disturbingly, knew exactly who to kill. For months, the investigation seemed stalled. Rumors spread through Pike County. Some speculated about drug cartels. Others whispered about family feuds. The FBI joined the case. Evidence was quietly gathered, and then slowly, one name began to surface: the Wagner family. Billy Wagner, his wife Angela Wagner, and their sons George Billy Wagner III and Edward Jake Wagner. The connection? A custody dispute. Jake Wagner had a child with Hannah Mae Roden, the young mother who was murdered just days after giving birth. Prosecutors would later allege that the Wagner family feared losing custody of the child, and instead of fighting the battle in court, they planned something unthinkable. According to investigators, tensions had been escalating for months. There were disagreements over parenting, concerns about custody rights, and deep resentment brewing between the two families. But what authorities eventually revealed stunned the public. They believed the Wagner family had meticulously planned the murders, conducting surveillance, purchasing tools, and studying the layout of the homes. Prosecutors would later argue that the killings were designed to eliminate anyone who might stand in the way of custody. 8 lives were taken over control. In November 2018, more than 2 years after the murders, arrests were finally made. All 4 members of the Wagner family were charged. Angela Wagner eventually pled guilty and agreed to testify against her husband and sons. Jake Wagner also pled guilty to 8 counts of aggravated murder in 2021. He admitted to planning and carrying out the killings. In 2022, George Wagner III was convicted on multiple counts, including aggravated murder, and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Billy Wagner's case would move toward trial in 2023. What investigators described as a calculated, coordinated ambush carried out by multiple family members, an entire family allegedly conspiring together. The Pike County Massacre shattered a community. For years, neighbors lived in fear, wondering who among them could commit such a crime. The surviving children of the Roden family were placed in protective custody immediately after the murders. Court proceedings lasted years. Testimony revealed disturbing details of planning and family loyalty overriding morality. The case became one of Ohio's most complex and expensive criminal investigations, and at its core, it remains a tragedy about obsession, control, and the catastrophic consequences of resentment left unchecked. 8 people, 4 homes, 1 night. The Pike County Massacre wasn't random violence. It wasn't chaos. It was, prosecutors say, a deliberate family conspiracy carried out in the dark while children slept beside their murdered parents. In rural Pike County, the hills are quiet again, but for the Roden family, the silence will never truly return. Because sometimes the most terrifying crimes aren't committed by strangers. They're committed by people you once called family. New York City, 1980. Times Square was very different back then. Neon lights flickered over adult theaters. Motels rented rooms by the hour. And danger lingered in the shadows. One night in December, a hotel employee at the Travel Inn Motor Hotel noticed smoke seeping from a room. When firefighters forced the door open, they found a horrifying crime scene. 2 women brutally murdered, their bodies mutilated, their identities removed. It would become one of the most disturbing serial murder cases in modern American history. And the man responsible? He wasn't a drifter. He wasn't homeless. He wasn't hiding in alleyways. He was a computer operator, a husband, a father. This is the chilling story of Richard Cottingham. Richard Cottingham was born in 1946 in the Bronx, New York. He grew up in what appeared to be a stable household. No immediate signs of violent instability. As an adult, he married. He had children. He worked in data processing, first for insurance companies, later for Blue Cross Blue Shield. By day, he was quiet, responsible, and predictable. But by night, especially in the late 1960s and 1970s, something darker emerged. Cottingham became obsessed with domination, control, and power over women. He began frequenting Times Square's red light district, and that's where his violent fantasies escalated into reality. In 1967, a young woman named Diane Cusick was found murdered in a department store stairwell in New Jersey. The case went cold for decades. At the time, there were no connections to Cottingham, but years later, DNA evidence would link him to that crime. Through the 1970s, women, many involved in adult work, began disappearing around New York and New Jersey. Some were found dismembered, some burned, some decapitated. The brutality shocked even seasoned investigators. He targeted women he believed were less likely to trigger investigations. Women living on the margins, but their lives mattered, and their cases slowly began forming a pattern. December 2nd, 1979, Cottingham checked into the Travel Inn in Manhattan with a young woman. Hours later, he left. Staff later discovered her body. She had been restrained, assaulted, and mutilated. 2 weeks later, he returned, this time with 2 women. When smoke was noticed under the door, authorities forced entry. Inside were the bodies of Dita Godarzi and an unidentified woman for years known only as Jane Doe. Both had been tortured. Both had been decapitated. Cottingham had attempted to burn the room, likely to destroy evidence. But this time, he made a mistake. A witness provided a vehicle description, and police traced it. And on May 22, 1980, Richard Cottingham was arrested after being caught in a motel room in New Jersey with another victim who survived. Cottingham was charged with multiple murders. Evidence included fingerprints, witness testimony, motel records, and forensic findings. In 1981, he was convicted of several murders in New York. Later, he was convicted in New Jersey. He received multiple life sentences. For decades, Cottingham remained largely silent. Authorities believed he may have been responsible for far more killings than proven, and they were right. Beginning in the 2010s, Cottingham began confessing. He admitted to additional murders dating back to the 1960s and 70s. Some cases long considered unsolvable were suddenly reopened. DNA advancements confirmed his involvement in previously cold cases. He confessed to killing at least 11 women. Some investigators suspect the true number could be much higher. His confessions were detailed, calculated. He described abductions, torture, and staging. It became clear that his violence spanned over decades. A chilling double life. Family man by day, serial predator by night. Cottingham's crimes were driven by domination. He didn't just kill, he tortured. He sought complete control. Criminologists often point to sadism in his case, the desire not just to end life, but to exert total power beforehand. Unlike impulsive killers, Cottingham was methodical. He selected motels, he carried tools, and he planned. And he returned home afterward to suburban normalcy. That duality is perhaps the most unsettling part. Richard Cottingham remains incarcerated in New Jersey. He continues to cooperate with investigators on cold cases. Families who waited decades for answers are finally receiving them. The questions remain. How many victims have yet to be identified? How many disappearances from the 1970s connect back to him? The passage of time complicates justice, but persistence and DNA technology continue uncovering the truth. The neon lights of the 1970s Times Square have faded. The motels have changed. The streets are different. But the story of Richard Cottingham remains a chilling reminder. Monsters don't always live in darkness. Sometimes they clock in at 9 a.m. Sometimes they tuck their children into bed. And sometimes they hide in plain sight for years. When we think of serial killers, we imagine dark alleys, strangers in the night, someone you'd never trust. But what if the most dangerous person in the room was the one assigned to save your life? He wore scrubs, he checked vital signs, he adjusted IV lines. Patients trusted him, families thanked him, hospitals employed him again and again and again. His name was Charles Cullen, and investigators believe he may have killed as many as 40 people, possibly more than 400, while working as a nurse. Charles Cullen was born in 1960 in West Orange, New Jersey. His childhood was marked by tragedy. His father died when Charles was just a baby. His mother passed away when he was 17. By his own later admission, he struggled with depression for most of his life and attempted multiple times. He briefly served in the U.S. Navy, working aboard submarines. Fellow sailors later described him as withdrawn and unstable. After leaving the Navy, Cullen enrolled in nursing school. He graduated in 1987. Nursing gave him something he craved: control, respect, access. It also gave him something far more dangerous: proximity to vulnerable people. Cullen's first nursing job was at a hospital in New Jersey in the late 1980s. It didn't take long for things to feel off. Patients began dying unexpectedly. Healthy individuals, or patients recovering, would suddenly crash. At one hospital, a suspicious pattern emerged. Patients receiving certain IV medications were dying without explanation. Cullen quietly resigned. No charges, no public investigation, just a resignation. And then he was hired somewhere else. Over the next 16 years, Charles Cullen worked at 9 different hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Each time, similar patterns appeared: unexplained cardiac arrests, mysterious insulin overdoses, and medication discrepancies. Each time he left before authorities could build a case. Hospitals feared lawsuits, negative publicity, and regulatory scrutiny. So instead of reporting him aggressively, many simply let him go. Cullen's method was both simple and horrifying. He tampered with IV bags and injected patients with lethal doses of drugs. Most commonly, digoxin, insulin, or other heart medications. These were drugs he had legitimate access to. No forced entry, no physical struggle, no weapon, just a syringe. He often targeted patients who were already seriously ill, making the deaths easier to mask. But he didn't always choose the dying. In some cases, he targeted patients who were improving. That unpredictability made the case even more disturbing. When later asked why he did it, Cullen claimed he wanted to spare patients from suffering. but evidence suggested something else. He chose victims based on impulse, opportunity, and access. He wasn't ending pain, he was exerting power. Here's the most chilling part of this story. Hospitals suspected him, but they didn't stop him. Internal reviews flagged medication discrepancies. Staff members reported odd behavior, and administrators quietly forced resignations. Yet formal reports to law enforcement were limited. Healthcare systems at the time were not interconnected. There was no centralized database flagging dangerous practitioners. So Cullen moved from job to job, carrying his license with him. In 1996, at one hospital, administrators even caught him entering a patient's room who wasn't assigned to him. He resigned. Again. Imagine how many lives might have been saved if just one hospital had fully escalated concerns. In 2003, while working at Somerset Medical Center in New Jersey, the pattern became impossible to ignore. A patient died unexpectedly after receiving digoxin, a heart medication. Pharmacy staff noticed that doses were being removed from the automated dispensing system under Cullen's login. This time, administrators contacted authorities. Police launched a quiet investigation. They brought in a fellow nurse, Amy Loughran, who worked closely with Cullen and considered him a friend. Investigators asked her to wear a wire. Over multiple conversations, Amy gently questioned him about the suspicious deaths. Eventually, Cullen began to crack. He admitted to harming patients. He admitted to injecting lethal doses. He admitted that he had done it before. In 2003, Charles Cullen was arrested. During interrogations, he confessed to killing 40 patients across multiple hospitals. But investigators believe the real number may be much higher. Some estimates suggest he may have been responsible for hundreds of deaths over 16 years. Exact numbers may never be known. Medical records were incomplete. Cases were not preserved. Many deaths were attributed to natural causes. In 2006, Cullen was sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. He will never be released. The Cullen case forced major changes in healthcare oversight. States began tightening reporting requirements. Hospitals were pressured to share information about dangerous employees. But the deeper issue remains unsettling. Cullen didn't hide particularly well. He was protected by silence, by bureaucracy, by institutions more concerned about liability than accountability. When we're in a hospital bed, we assume we're safe. We assume the people in scrubs are there to help us, and most are. But the story of Charles Cullen reminds us that trust, especially institutional trust, must be protected by vigilance. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't a stranger. It's the one checking your pulse. It's 2:35 a.m. in downtown San Francisco. A man in a dark jacket stumbles down a quiet street. He's bleeding badly. Security cameras catch him walking towards parked cars, lifting his shirt, revealing a stab wound. He tries calling for help, but no one answers. Minutes later, he collapses near the entrance of a luxury apartment building. The man dying alone on that sidewalk isn't just anyone. He's Bob Lee, tech executive, startup investor, and the founder of Cash App. Within hours, speculation explodes across social media. Was this random violence a symbol of crime in San Francisco, or something far more personal? Tonight we're breaking down what really happened, the timeline, the investigation, the arrest, and the truth behind one of the most talked about tech world murders in recent years. This is the story of Bob Lee. Before we talk about the crime, we need to understand the man. Bob Lee was a respected software engineer and entrepreneur. He helped develop Android software early in his career and later worked at Square, now known as Block, where he played a major role in creating Cash App. Cash App would go on to become one of the most widely used peer-to-peer payment platforms in the United States. Lee wasn't just a coder, he was deeply embedded in the startup ecosystem. By 2023, he was serving as Chief Product Officer at MobileCoin and investing in new tech ventures. He had recently moved from California to Miami, but was visiting San Francisco for business meetings when everything changed. In the early hours of April 4th, Bob Lee was in the Rincon Hill neighborhood of San Francisco. At around 2:30 a.m., he was seen on surveillance video walking alone on Main Street. Then something happened. Investigators later determined that Lee had been stabbed multiple times with a kitchen knife. Footage shows him staggering through the quiet streets. He approaches parked cars, seemingly hoping for someone inside to help. He even tries to use his phone, but no one responds. At 2:35 a.m., police receive a call reporting a stabbing. Officers arrive and find Lee critically wounded. Despite emergency efforts, he dies at the hospital. He was 43 years old. Within hours, news of the killing spread across social media. Tech leaders quickly respond. Elon Musk tweets about violent crime in San Francisco. Public figures debate city safety policies. But here's the twist. At that moment, no suspect had been named. No motive had been confirmed. Many assumed it was a random street attack, a symbol of urban crime spiraling out of control. But investigators weren't so sure. The San Francisco Police Department began reviewing surveillance footage from nearby buildings. What they discovered changed the narrative completely. Videos showed Lee walking with another man shortly before the stabbing. The two appeared to know each other. They were not strangers. Investigators also found the suspected murder weapon, a kitchen knife, discarded nearby. DNA testing would later tie it to a suspect. Over the next several days, police quietly built their case. Then, on April 13, 2023, 9 days after the murder, an arrest was made. The suspect was identified as Nima Momeni, a tech consultant based in the Bay Area. She was not a random attacker. Authorities alleged that Momeni and Lee had known each other through social and professional circles. According to prosecutors, the motive was deeply personal. Investigators said that earlier that night, Lee had spent time with Momeni's sister. Momeni allegedly confronted Lee, accusing him of inappropriate behavior towards her. Later, surveillance footage captured Lee entering Momeni's car. They drove to a secluded area near the Bay Bridge. That's where prosecutors say the argument escalated. Momeni allegedly stabbed Lee multiple times and then left him on the street. He was charged with murder. Momeni pled not guilty. His defense team argued that Lee had a lifestyle involving drugs and unstable relationships, suggesting there were complexities to the encounter. Prosecutors, however, maintained the stabbing was intentional and premeditated, a confrontation that turned deadly. As the case moved through the court proceedings, the narrative surrounding the murder shifted dramatically. This was not a story about random urban violence. It was a story about personal conflict. Why did this case explode nationally? Because Bob Lee wasn't just a victim, he was a symbol of Silicon Valley success. His death triggered debates about crime policy, public safety, and media narratives, all before the facts were fully known. The early assumption that his death was random fueled political talking points, but once the arrest was made, the story became far more complicated. It became about relationships, reputation, pride, and anger. Bob Lee left behind 2 children. Friends described him as brilliant, generous, and endlessly curious. Colleagues called him a force of nature in tech. Regardless of politics or public debate, at the center of this case is a father who never came home, and a moment of violence that changed multiple families forever. The killing of Bob Lee reminds us of something unsettling. The loudest narratives aren't always the most accurate. In the first 48 hours, many believed this was random chaos on city streets. But the investigation told a different story, one of familiarity, confrontation, and escalation. A late-night argument, a knife, a few irreversible seconds, and a life ended on a quiet San Francisco sidewalk. Just after midnight, in rural Oklahoma, a mobile home is on fire. Neighbors assume it's an accident, but firefighters notice something strange. The fire didn't start naturally. Inside, 2 people are dead, but 4 people were supposed to be in that home, and the 2 teenagers who lived there, gone. Not outside, not nearby, not in the hospital. Vanished. Police quickly realize this isn't a fire investigation. It's a homicide and a kidnapping. And the deeper they dig, the stranger it gets. Rumors, confessions, sightings, and a mystery that would last for decades. December 29, 1999, Welch, Oklahoma. Population barely over 600. In a quiet trailer sits the Freeman family home. Danny and Kathy Freeman lived there with their 16-year-old daughter, Ashley Freeman. Ashley's best friend, Lori Bible, is staying the night to celebrate Ashley's birthday. It's a normal, small-town sleepover. Movies, snacks, and late-night talking. No one knows it will become the last confirmed moment either girl is seen alive. Sometime after midnight, gunshots ring out. Then the fire begins. By morning, the home is destroyed. Inside, investigators find Danny and Kathy Freeman dead, but Ashley and Loria are gone. At first, police consider a possibility. Did the girls run away? That theory would not last long. The crime scene raises immediate questions. This wasn't random. Evidence suggests someone entered the home deliberately, and Danny Freeman had a history. Years earlier, he had testified against local criminals in a theft case, leading to arrests. In a town this small, grudges don't disappear easily. Investigators begin interviewing known offenders in the area. One name keeps appearing: Ronnie Busick, and 2 men often connected with him: Bill Welch, and David Pennington. All had violent criminal histories. All lived nearby. But police lack physical evidence tying them directly to the scene. Meanwhile, search teams combed woods, fields, and abandoned properties for the missing girls. Nothing. No footprints, no belongings, no confirmed sightings. Weeks turn into months. The case grows colder, but never quiet. For nearly 2 decades, the Freeman Bible case lives on rumor and fragments. People report seeing the girls in other states. Truck stop sightings, gas station encounters, anonymous tips claiming they were alive. Families chase every lead. Most go nowhere. Investigators believe the girls were abducted the night of the murders, but can't prove what happened after. Then, in the early 2000s, jail inmates began talking. Some claim the suspects bragged about the crime. Others say the girls were held somewhere for days. But stories conflict. Without bodies, prosecutors can't file murder charges. The case becomes one of Oklahoma's most haunting mysteries. 2 families waiting without answers. Until 2018. Nearly 19 years later, the investigators re-interview witnesses and suspects. This time, someone talks. Ronnie Busick agrees to a deal. In exchange for information, he pleads guilty to accessory to murder. According to his statement, the attack was revenge against Danny Freeman. After the murders, the girls were taken from the house. They were alive when they left. Busick leads investigators to a rural property. Search teams excavate the area, carefully and slowly. They recover evidence confirming the girls did not survive long after the abduction. For the first time in almost 2 decades, the families finally know what happened. But the men accused of committing the killings, Welch and Pennington, had already died years earlier. No courtroom testimony, only the truth, arriving decades later. Investigators reconstruct the night. The attackers entered the trailer after midnight. Danny and Kathy Freeman were killed. The house was set on fire to destroy evidence. Ashley Freeman and Loria Bible were kidnapped and taken away. Authorities believe the perpetrators thought the fire would erase everything: bodies, motive, and proof. Instead, the disappearance of the girls kept the case alive. For years, their absence was the loudest piece of evidence. Sometimes a crime scene disappears, but a missing person never does. Ronnie Busick is sentenced to prison in 2020. The case officially closes, legally. But emotionally, it never will. The family spent 19 years searching. Birthdays passed, graduations imagined, and lives paused. Their persistence kept investigators working long after most cold cases fade. And in the end, the truth didn't come from technology or chance. It came from refusing to forget. The Freeman Bible murders are remembered not just because of violence, but because of time. For nearly 20 years, 2 girls existed only as missing posters and possibilities, alive somewhere or not. And that uncertainty became its own kind of tragedy. The fire was meant to erase what happened. Instead, it ensured no one ever stopped asking. Because sometimes the longest investigations aren't about finding suspects. They're about finding answers families can finally live with. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please let me know in the comment section below. While you're there, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Reach out if there is a case you'd like me to cover, and check out our many playlists to fill your restful evenings. Until next time, stay curious.